It started as an ordinary night at Schofield Barracks, a military post on the island of Oahu, Hawaii. Inside one of the homes, 19-year-old Misha Mabeline Kalahulani Johnson was preparing for bed, 6 months pregnant and eagerly awaiting the arrival of her baby girl. The future stretched before her, a new chapter filled with promise. But that night, something happened. By morning, she was gone. No phone calls, no distress signals, just silence. By August 1st, 2024, panic had set in. A young, pregnant woman had vanished without a trace. The Army's Criminal Investigation Division launched a search, but no one was prepared for what came next. Within 24 hours, her husband, 28-year-old Private First Class Dwayne Arthur Johnson II, was taken into custody. He wasn't just a person of interest. He was the prime suspect, and yet there was no body. How does a wife disappear from a military base without a single trace of evidence leading to where she went? What was Dwayne hiding, and how could a man trusted by his country and welcomed into Misha's family now stand accused of the unthinkable? As investigators unraveled the truth, they found something far more disturbing than a missing persons case. This wasn't just about a woman who vanished. This was about secrets buried deep, secrets that would shake everyone who thought they knew the truth. At 19 years old, Misha Mabeline Kalahulani Johnson was standing on the edge of a new life. Young, full of energy, and carrying her 6-month-old unborn baby, she was preparing for motherhood with a mix of excitement and nerves. She had always been someone who embraced life with an open heart, and now she was ready to pour that same love into raising her daughter. Every step of the way she had been planning, picking out baby names, imagining late-night feedings, and picturing the moment she would finally hold her little girl in her arms. To those who knew her, Misha was more than just a daughter or a sister. She was a light in their lives, someone whose presence brought warmth and comfort. Her sister, Mariana Tapis, would later say that Misha had a way of making people feel important, seen, and valued. She loved deeply and trusted easily, always believing in the good in others. Family was everything to her, and when she introduced them to her husband, Dwayne Arthur Johnson II, they welcomed him with open arms. Their love story had been fast but passionate. Dwayne, an Army soldier 8 years her senior, seemed like the kind of man who could offer her stability, a future, a home. For Misha, he wasn't just a partner. He was someone she believed would protect her and their growing family. She married him, believing in a love that would last, in a life they would build together, and from the outside, everything seemed to fall into place. They lived together on Schofield Barracks, a military base in Oahu, Hawaii, preparing for the arrival of their child. But even the happiest of love stories have shadows that no one sees. Were there signs that something was wrong? Small, fleeting moments that Misha brushed off, convincing herself that everything was fine? Had she ever felt afraid? Had she ever considered that the man she had married might not be the person she thought he was? If she did, she never said a word, or maybe no one realized it until it was too late. What everyone could agree on was this: Misha was excited to become a mother. She had everything to look forward to. There was no reason for her to disappear, no reason for her to run. She had spent months preparing for her baby's arrival, imagining the life she would give her daughter. She was planning for a future, not an escape. So when she suddenly stopped answering her phone, when she vanished without a trace, when her husband, the man she trusted, became the prime suspect, it left her family grappling with one heartbreaking truth. Something had gone terribly, terribly wrong, and what investigators would soon uncover would leave everyone questioning how well they truly knew the people they loved. The night of Wednesday, July 31st, 2024 should have been like any other at Schofield Barracks in Oahu, Hawaii. Families settled into their homes, soldiers prepared for another day of duty, and life on the military base continued as usual. But inside one of the homes, something happened. Something that would leave a young mother to be vanished without a trace. 19-year-old Misha Johnson was 6 months pregnant. She was not just counting the days until her daughter's arrival, she was living for it. She had spent weeks preparing, talking about names, picturing the life she and her baby girl would have. But as the night stretched into early morning, something changed. By the next day, she was gone. It wasn't a gradual disappearance. There were no warning signs, no desperate calls for help, no trace of where she went. One moment she was there, the next she was simply missing. Her family's calls went unanswered. Messages were met with silence. Her social media, which she once used to share updates and excitement about her pregnancy, went cold. At first there was confusion. Maybe she had misplaced her phone, maybe she was resting, maybe there was a simple explanation. But deep down her family knew this wasn't like Misha. She wouldn't just disappear, especially not now. Then the panic set in. On Thursday, August 1st, 2024, Misha was officially reported missing. The Army's Criminal Investigation Division was called in. This wasn't a case of a woman who had simply decided to walk away from her life. This was different. And then, less than 24 hours later, something shocking happened. Her husband, 28-year-old Private First Class Dwayne Arthur Johnson II, was arrested. Not questioned, not brought in as a concerned husband, arrested. This was the moment that changed everything. When someone disappears, the first person law enforcement looks at is the one closest to them, especially a spouse. A husband is supposed to be the first person to raise the alarm, the one making calls, pleading for help, searching relentlessly. But Dwayne wasn't doing that. From the beginning, his actions didn't match those of a man desperately looking for his missing wife. Instead, investigators noticed something else: inconsistencies. He gave statements that didn't line up, details that shifted, timelines that didn't quite make sense. And then the evidence started surfacing. Authorities searched for any signs of Misha, tracing her movements, checking surveillance footage, analyzing phone records. What they found raised more questions than answers. Surveillance footage reportedly showed Dwayne purchasing tools and cleaning supplies, not the kind of items an expectant father would need in the days leading up to his child's birth. But why? What was he preparing for? There were no signs that Misha had left on her own, no records of her withdrawing money, no indication that she had packed a bag, made a phone call, or planned an escape. And then came the most chilling realization: her body was nowhere to be found. No body, no crime scene, just a missing woman and a husband whose story didn't add up. But the most disturbing discovery was still to come. When authorities arrested Dwayne on Friday, August 2nd, 2024, they didn't initially charge him with murder. Instead, the first charges were something else entirely: false official statements, obstruction of justice, and something even more disturbing: the production and distribution of child pornography.
Connection. An Army soldier originally from Frederick is in custody after his pregnant wife disappeared. WMER2 News' Jack Watson with details tonight. Jack, what have you been able to find out?
Yeah, Kelly, Misha Johnson was officially reported missing at the beginning of August. She lived with her husband on Oahu at the Schofield Army Barracks, and this week he is facing several charges in light of Misha's disappearance.
I'm on my hands and knees because that's all I can do.
Earlier this month, this was the emotional plea for answers from the family of Misha Johnson.
Please don't fail, Misha. I'm asking and pleading, please. Please come out. I hurt every day.
Misha was reported missing several weeks ago. Her husband is Private First Class Dwayne Arthur Johnson II from Frederick, Maryland. This week, he is charged with producing and distributing child pornography, obstructing justice, and providing false official statements. The Maryland native is not charged with murder as of Wednesday, but that could change.
The speed at which they're moving is unusual. So, I wouldn't be surprised to see the charge sheet changing in the very near future should they find something more, such as they find the body or they find the person, that kind of a thing.
The Army assigned Private First Class Johnson to the Hawaii-based 25th Infantry in June of last year, where he serves as a cavalry scout. He enlisted in the Army and trained at Fort Moore, Georgia in 2022. Maryland records show just 2 other incidents in the state. He was stopped twice in Frederick County that year, once for tinted windows and another for negligent driving. In a statement from the Army Office of Special Trial Counsel on Tuesday, a spokesperson says, quote, "This case remains an active investigation. We are confident that law enforcement will exhaust all efforts to find Misha, and the likelihood of additional charges is certainly a possibility as the case develops."
Specifically, we're looking for the timeline between July 12th and August 1st. And, we're interested in where PFC Johnson might have gone, who he might have talked to, any of the activities that we can start filling in those timelines.
Misha's family is saying she is dead, but the Army is not confirming that yet. Misha is 6 months pregnant and already picked out her baby daughter's name, Armani. PFC Johnson is being held until his preliminary hearing is set, and Army prosecutors have 4 months to bring him to trial. Kelly.
This wasn't just a case of a missing woman anymore. Investigators were dealing with something much more twisted. How did these charges connect to Misha's disappearance? Was this something she had discovered before she went missing? Had she confronted him about it? Had she been a threat to his secrets? And if Dwayne was capable of these crimes, what else was he capable of? For months, authorities searched for Misha, hoping to bring her home, to bring her family answers, closure, but they found nothing. Still, they were certain of one thing: she was never coming back. On Tuesday, February 12, 2025, after nearly 6 months of searching, the Army formally charged Dwayne Johnson with murder. Not just for Misha, but for her unborn child. The charges included murder of Misha Johnson, intentional killing of her unborn baby girl, obstruction of justice, false official statements, possession, production, and distribution of child pornography. Yet even with these charges, one question remained unanswered. Where was Misha? Could justice truly be served without a body? Could a man be convicted of murder when there was no physical proof of death? As Misha's family fought for answers, Dwayne made one thing clear: he wasn't talking. He waived his right to an Article 32 preliminary hearing, the military's version of a pretrial investigation. This meant the case would go straight to arraignment and trial. No body, no confession, only a mountain of circumstantial evidence and a family determined to make sure Misha and her unborn daughter got the justice they deserved. But would it be enough? In the next section, we examine the investigation. How did authorities build a murder case without a body? What were the key pieces of evidence that sealed Dwayne's fate? And most importantly, could they prove beyond a doubt that he was guilty? The moment Misha Johnson was reported missing, the Army's Criminal Investigation Division, CID, was called in. A young, pregnant woman had vanished from a secure military base, a place where people weren't supposed to simply disappear. The urgency was immediate. At first, investigators followed standard protocol, interviewing neighbors, checking security footage, and combing through Misha's phone and financial records. They expected to find something, a clue, a message, a last-minute errand that would explain where she had gone, but they found nothing. No recent bank withdrawals. No calls to friends or family. No digital footprint after July 31, 2024. It was as if she had ceased to exist overnight. And that wasn't just unlikely, it was impossible. Investigators turned to the one person who should have been frantic with worry, her husband, Dwayne Johnson. If his wife had vanished, why wasn't he searching for her? If he had nothing to do with it, why were there so many inconsistencies in his statements? When detectives questioned Dwayne, his answers weren't adding up. What time had he last seen her? That changed depending on who he spoke to. Had she told him she was going somewhere? His response wavered. Why hadn't he reported her missing? His excuses made no sense. But it wasn't just his words that made investigators suspicious, it was his behavior. He wasn't asking where his wife was. He wasn't showing fear or desperation. He wasn't pleading for help. Instead, he was avoiding questions. He was giving law enforcement the kind of answers that weren't meant to provide clarity, but to buy time. Then came the moment investigators stopped treating him like a worried husband and started treating him like a suspect. Law enforcement began looking for any activity that could place Misha somewhere after she was last seen. Street cameras, store surveillance, military base security feeds. If she had left the base, there would be proof. But there wasn't. Instead, they found something else. Footage reportedly showed Dwayne making purchases that raised immediate red flags. Cleaning supplies, tools, and other items investigators believed were used in the aftermath of the crime. This wasn't a man preparing for fatherhood. This wasn't a man who had a pregnant wife at home waiting for him. So what was he planning? And what had already happened? Investigators seized Dwayne's electronic devices, his phone, his computer, anything that could tell them what he had been doing in the days and weeks before Misha's disappearance. What they found sent shockwaves through the case. Buried inside his digital records were images and videos of child pornography. This wasn't speculation. It wasn't circumstantial evidence. It was right there, files stored on his devices, indisputable, undeniable. It was the first charge they could make stick, and it gave authorities a reason to hold him in custody while they built their murder case. But the discovery of those files raised an even more chilling question. Did Misha know? Had she found out about what was on his devices? Had she confronted him? And had that confrontation led to her death? For weeks, law enforcement and military personnel searched for Misha's remains. They scoured the surrounding areas, conducted interviews, and followed up on every possible lead. But they came up empty. There was no body, no crime scene, no definitive proof of what had happened to her. What they had instead was a mountain of circumstantial evidence. A husband with inconsistent statements, surveillance footage of suspicious purchases, a man already guilty of other crimes. It wasn't enough to say he had killed her, they had to prove it. Historically, murder trials without a body are difficult to win. In most homicide cases, the victim's remains provide the ultimate proof cause of death: DNA evidence, injuries, forensic analysis. But in Misha's case, they had nothing. Could they convince a jury to convict a man of murder without physical evidence of the crime? Would the lack of a body leave room for doubt? Prosecutors had no choice but to push forward. On Tuesday, February 12, 2025, Dwayne Arthur Johnson II was officially charged under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. The charges were as follows: murder of Misha Johnson, intentional killing of her unborn child, obstruction of justice, false official statements, possession, production, and distribution of child pornography. The message was clear. Even without a body, they believed they had enough to prove he was guilty. But Dwayne wasn't backing down. He waived his Article 32 preliminary hearing, which meant the case would go straight to trial. With Dwayne refusing to talk, Misha's body still missing, and a legal battle ahead, there were still so many questions left unanswered. What had actually happened inside their home on the night of July 31st? Had Misha confronted him about his dark secrets? Had this been premeditated, or had something spiraled out of control? And the most painful question of all, would her family ever find her body? With the trial looming, one thing was certain: this case was far from over. Would prosecutors be able to convict Dwayne without a body? Or would the lack of physical evidence set a killer free? In the next section, we step into the courtroom. What evidence did prosecutors present to the jury? What was Dwayne's defense? And when the verdict was finally read, did justice prevail? The trial of Private First Class Dwayne Arthur Johnson II was not just about proving guilt. It was about proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt without the most critical piece of evidence: a body. With the courtroom packed, the proceedings began. This wasn't a civilian trial, this was a court-martial, held under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ, a system with its own rules and standards. But at its core, the stakes were the same. A young woman and her unborn child were gone, and the man accused of their murder stood before the court, facing the possibility of a lifetime behind bars. The prosecution was prepared. They had no confession, no eyewitnesses, and no body, but they had something just as powerful: evidence that told a story of lies, manipulation, and the slow unraveling of a man who thought he could outsmart investigators. In the absence of a body, the prosecution focused on what they did have, and it was damning. They began by laying out the timeline of events, showing that Misha was last seen alive on July 31, 2024, and was reported missing the next day. She had never left the military base. The prosecution then turned to the surveillance footage. The jury saw images of Dwayne purchasing cleaning supplies, tools, and other items that suggested an attempt to cover up a crime. What reason would a man expecting a child in just a few months have to make such purchases? They presented financial records, phone logs, and internet searches. They argued that Dwayne had made no effort to search for his wife. He had not called her, texted her, or reported her missing. Instead, he had lied to authorities and obstructed their investigation. Then came the most chilling piece of evidence: the discovery of child pornography on his electronic devices. This was no longer just about a missing wife. This was about a man whose secrets ran deeper than anyone had realized. Had Misha found out about his crimes? Had she confronted him? Had that confrontation led to her murder? The jury listened in silence. There were no dramatic outbursts, no signs of remorse from the accused. Dwayne sat emotionless. But the prosecution had one final weapon: the people who knew Misha best. Misha's sister, Mariana Tapiz, took the stand. Her voice trembled as she described the pain of not knowing where her sister was, of not having a body to bury. She spoke of how their family had trusted Dwayne, welcomed him, believed he would protect Misha. Instead, she said, he had betrayed them in the worst way imaginable. She turned to the jury and asked them to see Misha not just as a victim, but as a daughter, a sister, a mother-to-be who never got to meet her child. There wasn't a single person in the room who didn't feel the weight of her words. But the defense was waiting. Dwayne's attorneys knew they had one major advantage: the lack of a body. They argued that without physical remains, there was no proof that Misha was actually dead. They pointed out that no murder weapon had been found. There was no blood, no DNA, no forensic evidence tying Dwayne directly to a crime scene. They suggested an alternative theory, that Misha had left on her own. They painted a picture of a young woman, pregnant and emotional, who may have decided to disappear. And then came the most controversial argument of all. If Dwayne had really killed her, why hadn't he confessed? Why hadn't he broken down under pressure? Was it possible that the prosecution's case, despite all its evidence, was missing the one thing they needed most? Proof? The courtroom was silent when the jury returned. A decision had been made. Dwayne Johnson stood motionless as the charges were read. Murder of Misha Johnson. Intentional killing of her unborn child. Obstruction of justice. False official statements. Possession, production, and distribution of child pornography. The judge asked for the jury's decision. The words that followed would determine whether Misha's family would get the justice they had been fighting for. Would a man be convicted of murder without a body? Or would the lack of physical evidence create just enough doubt to set him free? In the next section, we reveal the verdict. Would Dwayne finally be held accountable? Or was this case about to take one final devastating turn? The courtroom was silent. Every eye was fixed on the jury as they prepared to deliver their decision. Would a man be convicted of murder without a body, or would the lack of physical evidence cast just enough doubt to set him free? Dwayne Johnson stood motionless, his hands clasped in front of him, his expression unreadable. For months he had remained silent. No confession, no explanations, no remorse. Now the moment of truth had arrived. The judge turned to the jury. The four persons stood. The words that followed would change everything. On the charge of murder in the first degree, guilty. A sharp breath cut through the air. Misha's family collapsed into sobs. Her sister Mariana held on to their mother, their pain raw and visible. After months of agony, uncertainty, and searching for answers, they finally had a measure of justice. On the charge of intentionally killing an unborn child, guilty. Dwayne blinked, but he didn't flinch. He showed no reaction, no anger, no fear, no regret. It was as if he had already accepted his fate. The charges continued. Obstruction of justice, guilty. False official statements, guilty. And then, the final charge, the crime that first put him under scrutiny, the one that had led to his arrest before Misha's body was even presumed gone. Death on the charge of possession, production, and distribution of child pornography. Guilty. For Misha's family, the verdict was a victory, but not a relief. Their daughter, their sister, was still gone. Her body had never been found. Her baby girl never had a chance to take her first breath. Mariana, tear-streaked but steady, spoke to reporters outside the courtroom. "We don't get to bring Mishka back," she said, "but at least we know that man will never hurt anyone else again." When asked if she believed Dwayne would ever reveal the location of Misha's remains, she shook her head. "No, he won't talk. He never has. He never will." And she was right. Throughout the entire trial, Dwayne never spoke about what happened that night. He never explained where he had put her body. He never showed remorse. Dwayne was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A military court does not allow for appeals in the same way as civilian courts, and his fate was sealed. But even with the harshest sentence possible, one question remained. Where was Misha? Would her family ever have a grave to visit? Would they ever know the full truth of what happened inside that home on July 31st, 2024? Or would they be forced to live with the ache of uncertainty forever? Misha Johnson's case was more than just another tragic crime. It was a legal battle that tested the strength of no-body murder convictions. It was a case that exposed the hidden dangers women face, even from the people they trust most. It was a reminder that justice, even when served, can never undo the pain of loss. The fight for answers was not over. Her family still held on to hope. One day they believed the truth would be known. But would Dwayne Johnson ever break his silence? Or would Misha's final resting place remain a mystery forever? Justice had been served, or at least that's what the court had decided. Dwayne Johnson would spend the rest of his life in prison, but the haunting truth remained. Misha Johnson's body had never been found. For her family, the verdict brought accountability, but not closure. How could it, when they still had nowhere to lay her to rest? The case left behind more questions than answers. What really happened on the night of July 31st, 2024? Did Misha know something she wasn't supposed to? Had she confronted Dwayne about his hidden crimes? Was her death planned, or had it been an act of sudden, uncontrollable violence? There were also the chilling realities about the justice system and no-body murder cases. This trial proved that a conviction was possible without a body, but it didn't erase the challenges that came with it. Many similar cases never make it to trial because prosecutors fear the lack of physical evidence will create doubt. How many other victims have disappeared, their killers walking free, simply because their remains were never found? Then, there was the issue of violence against women, especially at the hands of intimate partners. Misha was just 19 years old, pregnant and living with the man she believed would protect her. Instead, he became her worst nightmare. Her case was not the first, and tragically it would not be the last. Her story became a stark reminder that sometimes danger isn't lurking in the shadows, it's standing right beside you, disguised as love. Her family refuses to let her name fade into the past. They continue to search for her remains, hoping that one day someone will come forward with information, someone who saw something, someone who knows the truth. And that leads to the final question: will Dwayne Johnson ever talk? He has nothing left to lose. No appeals, no future outside of prison walls. He will live out his days knowing the secrets of that night will die with him, unless one day he chooses to confess. But will he? Or will Misha's story remain unfinished, forever missing the final, most important piece? Her family still waits, the world still wonders, and the truth, buried somewhere, remains just out of reach. This case raises so many difficult questions. Do you think justice was truly served? Should nobody murder trials require stronger evidence, or was the conviction justified? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this case compelling and want to hear more in-depth true crime stories, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. We bring you the most gripping, real-life crime stories, and your support helps us continue to shed light on cases like Misha's. Thank you for watching, and as always, stay safe.